Good afternoon. Today is February 1st, 2018. My name is Helene Tischler. I'm here at the Newton City Hall Law Library with Mr. Bruce Hambro. Together we're participating in the Newton Talks Oral History Project that's being conducted with the Newton Free Library, Historic Newton, and the Newton Senior Center. Thank you so much for being here. Now, I know you've been a long-time resident. Can you tell us where you're from originally, how you came to live in Newton?
Well, I was born in Newton Wellesley Hospital in 1949. I'm 68, and proud to be born and bred in Newton. I went to Ward's Elementary School, Bigelow Junior High School, Newton North, class of 67. And I moved away in 1983, but I continue to be very invested in Newton. I live right nearby, so I do all my shopping and see all my friends in Newton. So even though I live in Waltham, I'm just over the border.
Okay. So why did you leave in 83?
Well, 83,
where did you go?
I moved to an apartment, and then I got married. In 1987, I was on the committee, 20th High School Reunion Committee. I had never been married before. I was 38. And I met a woman there from my high school class, and we got married.
That's wonderful.
And we then moved to San Francisco in 1989. And long story short, we lived there and then moved to Washington, D.C. after a while, and then got divorced. She moved back to California. I moved back to Boston in 2001. And I moved back to this, it just happened to... Long story short, I moved back to this complex in Waltham, which is very convenient. And
that's great.
I mean, I wish I was living in Newton, but
well,
I'm so close.
Your heart is in Newton.
My heart is in Newton. So,
what village or neighborhood did you grow up in?
Well,
what was it called?
Cotton Street is in the apex of Newton Corner, Newton Center, Chestnut Hill. It's like in the middle.
Yes.
So Cotton Street is the Ward School, which is like Chestnut Hill. But if you go to the end of Cotton Street and Center Street, you're at the oldest cemetery in Newton, the Newton Cemetery, across from Boston. What was Boston College Law School before it was Boston College Law School?
Yes.
That's Catholic Girls' School. I can. Anyway, so
Mount Alvernia.
Sacred Heart
okay.
College.
And there was Mount Alvernia.
Right.
They're still there.
They're
still there.
So every school that I walked to, Ward School, Bigelow, and Newton High School were equidistant. Each school was about a 25-30 minute walk. Well, Ward was a little closer, but
yes, it sounds like it.
I go to Chestnut Hill for Ward, go down to Newton Corner for Bigelow, and I go to Newtonville for Newton High School. So it was a great. I mean, the educational system in Newton. When I was in school, Time Magazine called Newton High School the top high school in the country. Okay, we had a superintendent, Charles Brown, and another guy, Harold Howe. You know that name?
I don't.
Well, he was either he was the superintendent or a principal. I think he was a superintendent before Charles Brown.
Right.
You know that name?
Yes.
Okay. Harold Howe was picked by JFK to be the head of the federal HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That was Harold Howe. He came from Newton. Newton had this axis. I call it the Cambridge Newton axis. We had a lot of Harvard people from the Harvard School of Education teaching at Newton High School.
Right.
Bob Zeeb, I don't know if you know that name. Robert Zeeb, he died a couple of years ago. He was in Newton, the Newton Education Department, and there were many great teachers who came from Harvard. And we had a tremendous school. We had 80 clubs in this school.
That's amazing.
It was amazing.
And it looks like you participated in.
Yeah,
a lot of them.
I ran the film festival. This is before DVDs, and we had a 16 millimeter projector.
What were some of the films?
I had the birds. Do I remember? I've got all the things here. The poster, the birds, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Horse Feathers. Sabrina, all kinds of. I got the posters here somewhere.
Did it influence the field you went into eventually?
I actually did go to work for Walt Disney. I think the posters in there somewhere. I don't know.
Yes,
but
we do have.
I had a lot of posters, and this Newtonite, one of the Newtonite shows, The Birds is Coming. The Birds is Coming. So I spent a lot of time in the Newtonite office because I had to give the press releases and stuff. Right. I also was the lead male lead actor in a number of plays, including Mad Woman of Chaillot, which was the big senior play. And
Right.
Then I went to Northwestern in the summer between junior and senior year to do acting program. That was fun. I went to NYU after that. I thought I was going to go into acting, but I veered off into just liberal arts. I just wanted to learn all about life, about everything.
Right.
And I didn't want to do acting full time because there was so much to learn. So I was an English major, history minor.
Mm-hmm.
Came back to Boston.
So right after NYU, you returned?
Yeah, I went to law school, New England School of Law, for 3 weeks. I realized I was not going to be a lawyer. Okay. So I dropped out of there and I sold insurance. Now, I have to back up. My father was a hot-shot salesman. He was a great salesman. He was one of the top jewelry salesmen in the costume jewelry end, and he was a wholesale jeweler. So I had that salesman part in me.
Yes.
My mother was more the intellectual side, and my father was more sales. So I had both.
Right.
So
did they grow up in Newton as
well? No, he grew up in Dorchester. She grew up in Brooklyn.
Ah, okay.
And there's me when I was 3.
Oh, that's wonderful. With
like
the old car.
The old Buick or something.
We'll try to get some photos.
Yeah.
And how did they end up in Newton, since you were born
okay. So my father moved to Brookline, and he met my mother at a social camp in the Berkshires or something.
Right, right.
And she was up from Brooklyn, and he said, "Hey, come on up to Boston." And they dated, and he asked her to marry her, and blah, blah, blah. He got married. She moved up here in 1940, left Brooklyn. She went to Rasmus Hall in high school and the Hunter College.
I grew up in Brooklyn.
Okay.
I know it well.
And my grandmother lived there until the 80s, and Grand Army Plaza. So she moved up here in 1940. They got married. They lived in Brookline, and then they moved to Strathmore Road in Cleveland Circle.
Yes.
Then they moved into a 2-family house on Com Ave, 4 doors up from the BC, right on the corner of Crosby Road. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know that area.
Sure.
There used to be an Esso station right next, and I used to watch the marathon. I was on the, I was 3 years old,
right.
but there were only 500 people in the marathon, and it was very easy.
You have those memories. That's amazing. And
I don't forget anything. I remember everything.
And then you were born when they lived in Cotton Street.
No, I was born I was born in Newton Wellesley Hospital in 1949. They were living on Com Ave.
Okay.
Now they have 3 children, and they needed a house, so a bigger place. So they moved to Cotton Street in 1952. I was 3. And that's that picture.
That's really beautiful. Now, do you remember anything about the neighborhood?
Oh, I remember everything.
Period? Well,
what do you mean? I remember? I remember everything.
What made a really big impression?
Oh,
any landmarks? Any specific?
The neighborhood was just beautiful. First of all, there's Tudor Village there. It's Tudor Village, and our house was distinctive because I showed a picture of the house.
Yes, beautiful.
It was distinctive because it was white. See, it's white. Yes. It's not the red brick.
Right, which a lot of the Tudors
Right,
had.
it was white. It was very distinctive. We had a fence around it at one time, and it was wonderful. I just remember coming home from ward school. Oh, I'm home, and I had a warm home. My mother was always cooking, and she didn't work when we were growing up.
Right.
We even had a maid for a while, and my father, did very well, and he'd come home at like 5:30 those days.
Sure.
He'd come home 5:30.
That was the.
I had an older brother, an older sister, and me. I was the prince. I was the little baby prince,
course.
baby,
Right. So
So it was a beautiful, just a warm, and we had a great neighborhood of kids, a lot of kids my age, and it was hilly, and go up and down these hills, and either way, any way you walked, it was interesting. The homes, the people, so many great people. We were very social and had a lot of friends. A lot of friends.
In addition to schools, which you mentioned, were there any other places or landmarks that specifically you have great memories of?
Everything. I wish I had a map of Newton. I gave it to a friend of mine because I said, take a tour. He said he comes by Center Street on the way back. He's a DJ at sometimes at WEEI.
Right.
So he comes back through Newton, right up past Cotton Street. I said, here, take a right on Cotton Street. And I gave him a map of Newton. Yeah. And I said, here, you can see my house. So I left them. It's a beautiful map. But if you just look at a map, first of all, there are 12 or 13 or 14 villages.
Yes.
And Newton is broken down into these villages. So people come into Boston, they want me to give them a tour.
Of course,
and I'm,
it well.
I'm a tour guide. I'm a great guide. And and they can't believe that Newton. They say, "Where's the big city?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, it's a bunch of villages, and it's like the 10th largest city in Massachusetts, but you wouldn't know it by looking at it."
Yeah.
But everything, Newton Commonwealth Golf Course was right behind Ward School. I used to see my camp director. We went to Camp Vernonia. Dave Michelle teed off on the 4th tee right behind our elementary school.
And did you spend a lot of time at the parks?
I spent a lot of I throughout my life. Like, when I was a kid, I was at Ward School Park. Okay.
Yes.
At Bigelow, Burr School, and I was on the tennis team and basketball team, and I have my Bigelow B emblem here somewhere.
I saw that.
Yeah. And Newton High School, of course. And then I played a lot of tennis at Newton Center Playground.
Yes.
I also played tennis at next to Newton South. I remember playing tennis there. I mean, I played tennis a lot of places. I played golf at every,
Sure.
at Newton Commonwealth. And
did Newton North have its tennis courts?
Yeah.
It did.
Yeah. Newton North was called Newton High School, by the way.
Right.
Even though there was a Newton South,
yes,
they called it Newton High. They didn't decide to call it Newton North till years later.
It was the high school.
It was the high school. So when we went, this is why class of 1967 we call it Newton High School, even though it's Newton North. Okay.
Right.
No.
Right.
By the way, we
that
printed.
Is different.
Yes. Here's my Bigelow B.
Oh, fabulous.
Certificate.
So wonderful. I wonder if they still do that.
I don't know. We had at the reunion we had a little gift bag at the end. We gave out those booklets, and we printed up every junior high school picture.
Oh,
okay.
These are amazing.
So we had 4 junior high schools fed into Newton. Okay, so
wow.
Warren, Weeks, Bigelow, and Day, and we printed them up and. It's
do you remember
mind-blowing.
how large your junior high school
Yeah, ours was like, and as a matter of fact, it's right on here. It's 300. No, ours was, Day was 203. Day was 203. What's this, Weeks or Warren? Weeks was 351 or something. Warren was the biggest.
Yeah.
And Bigelow was like 109. Bigelow was the smallest.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Which is nice. And how large was Newton North when you were there?
We had 830 kids in our class. Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's not even the largest one. About 1964 or 65, they had about 1,000.
Right.
It was the peak of the baby boom.
Right. Right. And did you stay in touch with many people?
Are you
Newton?
kidding? Of course. That's why I was
the
co-chairman.
It sounds like you are
I am the guy. With 2 other people, I formed this committee for the reunion in January of 2016. Mm-hmm. And we finally started, our first committee meeting was in August of 2016. And we had 15 committee meetings before the reunion. And the first thing I did is that we had 12 people on our committee. Everybody bring your Newtonian. So everybody brought, okay. We started with the picture A, Kevin Abood. We went through every picture.
Amazing.
Who knows Kevin Abood? Okay, you find him. Who knows Ruth Phyllis Adler? Okay. This took us 2 hours to get through this.
I imagine you had that big a class.
So then we had 12 people going out and finding the people, and it wasn't easy, because there's Facebook. That made it, on the one hand, easier. On the other hand, the 20th reunion, there were so many parents who were still living at their houses, we could call them up, but they're not there anymore.
No. That definitely has changed.
So I was responsible for either indirectly or directly getting 80 people to attend the reunion.
Amazing.
So
that is fabulous.
I hold the record.
Now, you mentioned playing tennis and sports and being in plays and the film society. Anything else that you remember what people did?
Well, first of all,
when you were in school for fun.
Oh, in
Newton?
School?
Well, not.
I mean,
in
I
school,
did a lot of
even
stuff
outside.
after. Yeah.
Right.
Well, school, I was mainly involved in school. I did a lot of things. I was in school. I went to Temple Israel. I went to Camp Vernonia. I had a big family, a social life. I mean, I was always busy.
Yes, no, it sounds like that.
Then I went to NYU, and then I had my New York experience, and then I came back, and when I was at I went to Babs. Oh, so I sold insurance after dropping out of law school for about a year, and then I went back to Babson and got my MBA there. Right. After that, I went to work for Walt Disney. I went to Philadelphia, and then I moved back to Boston in 1976, and thought I was going to work for Paramount Pictures, and it fell through. And I had an opportunity to start a business, a music management and booking agency for a couple of groups, mainly this group that we did some records, Storm and Norman and Susie. Norman Zamchek, you know that name, Zamchek?
I do.
Okay. Norman Zamchek is from Newton. He's 2 years older than me. Newton High School. He graduated from Exeter, but he did go to Newton High School. And his father was a gastroenterologist, very famous. And anyway, Norman was a great piano player and composer of original music. And he wanted me to manage his band. So I took a flyer. I said, all right. And Susie was she was kind of a combination of Janis Joplin and Sophie Tucker and Bette Midler. She was
That's
wild.
Quite a combination.
Wild, yeah. Great voice, bluesy voice. And they were great. And they were playing these little bar bands in Cambridge. And I took over the management and booking. And within 9 months, I had them at Carnegie Hall. And then we did this Polydor Records. So I did a lot of things in the music business. It was very exciting. And then let's see what happened. I was always involved in politics, too. And when I was at NYU, I did a thesis in my politics class on Robert Drynan's election in 1970. And I was on his campaign in the summer of 70. And then I was on various campaigns. Bill Carmen for mayor. David Cohen when he ran for alderman back in the 70s. He went to Ward School, and I went to Ward School, so I campaigned out in front of Ward School.
That's amazing.
So I'm trying to think what progression, 70s. And then 1980 comes, and Bob Drynan is forced out of, he has to leave Congress. You know about that?
Yes.
The Pope. So Barney Frank throws his hat in the ring along with the 12 other guys. So I went out of the State House. The day that it was announced on the radio, I said, I went to his office. I was there before he was at 8 o'clock. I said, Barney, I'd like to volunteer for you. So he put me in his office, and I ran the phone bank. I was the phone operator for Barney Frank.
Wow.
His first campaign. I was his first volunteer.
That's great. That's really amazing.
And I worked on a couple of his campaigns. I worked on Mike Dukakis' campaign, and let's see. And then then I moved out of Newton, and then so I got out of politics.
Right.
But anyway, so
but you had very strong roots.
And in 1972, I was on the Ward 7 Democratic Committee that met at Grace Church, and they had a vote on who to send to the Massachusetts Democratic Convention in Worcester, and they voted for me along with a couple of other people. And I was a delegate, so I do a lot of political things.
Yeah,
it was fun, but that was just
amazing.
like a sidelight. I love politics, but it was.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Now, when you came back,
and also the arts.
Yes, the arts. Like what kinds of things?
Well,
do you remember?
movies. I'm a movie buff. I'm a great movie buff.
Right, right. But anything specific to Newton? Any special events here that you can recall?
Well, yeah.
You had all those things in school. That sounded amazing.
Yeah, actually, recently, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I got Storm and Norman and Susie reunited after years, and they played at the Newton Library. Well, who's here from the library? Yeah. Okay, Ellen Myers booked me, and actually, I have done a concert.
Really? What kind?
Cole Porter. Was it Cole Porter or George Gershwin? I'm trying to think. It was Gershwin.
Okay.
It was George Gershwin, and I was a narrator. I have a lot of people in the music business who I know, great singers and jazz musicians. So I booked this band, and I narrated George Gershwin's life. And it was a concert. It was sold out. It was great. So that was one concert, and then I booked Storm and Norman and Susie a couple times with Ellen, and so I know Ellen pretty well. I knew Beth Purcell. You know Beth Purcell, yeah. So I knew her very well, and I still see her once in a while. My current thing that I do now is I do these audiovisual lectures at senior centers and senior. I was just at Newton Senior Center.
Is that how you heard about this?
Yeah, that's well, I'm not sure. I called up, and it just turned out that Alana picked up, but she also booked me for this lecture that I did on Frank Sinatra. So I do these 1-hour audiovisual presentations. I do, the whole lives and careers of these great singers and songwriters like Gershwin, Sinatra, Cole Porter, Judy Garland, Barbra Streisand. I have 9 programs. I go all over eastern New England. I've got 3 or 4 shows a week I do.
Really?
And when I'm not doing the shows, when the days off, I will substitute teach at Wellesley High School or in this Needham's school.
And
so,
what do you teach there?
well, I'm a substitute teacher, but
Right,
it's, so
right. But
usually English, math, social studies.
okay, because you said you had history.
I was
also
a history.
in your background.
As a matter of fact, 10 years ago, I retired. I was in marketing and sales. Okay, so I was in the music business 5 years, but
Yes.
I couldn't make any money. It just, they never made it big. So I worked for a Newton company called Champagne Offset Company on Needham Street, no longer there. Beautiful commercial printer. I was a commercial printing salesman for 8 years. And then I worked for the Massachusetts Association of Realtors as their advertising director. And then when I got married, after I got married, my wife decided she wanted to move back to California. So that's when I left. And I was with trade groups for the next 15 years. I was a trade association executive. Then I retired, and because I wanted to go, and I was like in my late 50s, I decided I want to go back to school and learn, I want to get a certificate to teach history in the public school system, which I did. I went to Framingham State. I taught at 4 different school systems, like these long-term substitutes, 4 or 5 month maternity leave.
Right,
so I taught
So you had
in Wayland, Weston, Belmont, and Needham.
Oh my goodness.
So I taught U.S. history, ancient history, different. It was great, European history. Never got a full-time job, which I won't go into. But it was okay because I then got Storm and Norman back together with Susie, and I got them on a MIT radio. And I did a radio. They asked me to do a radio show on Frank Sinatra, which I did. And after that, somebody asked me to put together a lecture on Sinatra. This is about 5 years ago, which I.
And this is the one you go around.
That's what I do now. So the last 5 years, I'm building up this business, and it's like my post-retirement business.
Well, I think you need to teach about Newton history. But
yeah, I could absolutely.
But I get somewhere.
I get good money. I get good money for this, so I got to make sure.
No, that's phenomenal. Now, each time you came back, did you notice big changes in Newton, the type of population, the areas?
Well, the biggest thing was the McMansions. Okay, that freaked me out. Now David Cohen and I would, I was friendly with him. I'd go see him at his office every once in a while. Right. And the one thing I think we disagreed on was these houses. I said, is there any way to stop this McMansionizing? He said, no. Basically, that's, the way of the world. You must have seen a lot of development, though, over time. Yeah. But it's not, it's not horrendous. What I don't like, is stuff that impacts me, like this Newtonville project on Austin Street. Right. I don't like that. Because it's taken away, it's a nice parking lot there. It's nice and open. Now you're going to have, it's getting citified, Yeah, it is. So did it get a lot bigger since you came back after all your travels? Chestnut, and the population. Chestnut Hill has exploded, that commercial section. Yes, and that wasn't there when you were growing up. But, my motto is there's nothing more constant than change. You can't stop this. Right. But if I used to go to and view the aldermanic meetings here. I love doing that, but when I was living in Newton, I don't do that now. But right. I would love to. Oh, okay. I did have an impact on Newton, a direct impact. Yes. In 2002, I went to the open hearings for the renovating the old Newton High School. Right. And they had public hearings and in the auditorium there, and they were saying, well, we're thinking of renovating. That was the idea, renovating it for $80 million. Well, how about tearing it down and building a new one? That would cost $100 million. It wasn't much difference. So, or maybe it was 70 and 100. I don't know. Anyway, I got up and gave this impassioned speech why they should tear down that old high school, and then I get a lot of applause, and that's what they did. They did. But I think it cost more than it cost twice as much. I didn't know it was going to be double. But it was definitely double. It's funny when that's because David Cohen. That's why Cohen left office. But he said to me in his office, he said, "Well, if I ever get my," I said, "You need to get your picture in the new Newton High School, just like Ted Mann has his picture in the library." He says, "Well, if I ever get my picture there, I'll have to change my name to Newton North."
Right.
So
right.
anyway,
For sure. And when you were growing up, was there a lot of diversity in Newton? Did you
No.
find that has changed? What was the high school
No.
composition?
It's funny because when we went to we used the Newton High School print shop a lot for these photos,
Yes,
and
yes.
the booklet and everything. So there's one girl's looking at the high school Bigelow, and she didn't see any black people. You were racist. Well, the point is, we didn't have any black people in the city.
Right.
There may be a couple. There were a couple at high school. There may be 5 black kids in high school, and maybe a couple of Asians, and that was it.
That was it. And no one was bussed in from
No,
different programs.
no. But we didn't know. I mean, we just that was basically the composition to me when I went to Newton High School was Italian, Irish, Jewish, and WASP. Those 4,
Right.
and 1 or 2 Asians and 4 or 5 blacks, and that was it. That was the
Right.
diversity.
Right.
We didn't know anything about
Right.
diversity.
So that's
that
a
was
big
not an
change.
issue then.
No.
The
So
issue
there's
became
big change.
the issue became drugs and Vietnam. Those were the issues. I mean,
Right.
drugs came right at the end of my high school career, and then of course Vietnam. My senior year in Newton High School, I went down to New York for the first Peace March. So
Okay.
no, those were the issues then.
Right. And how did it
And
impact
Timothy
the
Leary,
high-
by the
yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Timothy Leary lived right next to my friend Norman Zamchek, and as did Ram Dass.
Oh.
So they were very influential in that.
Absolutely. And how did the Vietnam War influence or impact your high school class your senior year? Did you find that it
Well,
impacted you?
yeah, there were a lot. I mean, that was. I remember going to that Peace March in April, and there was a couple of teachers who were, trying to rev us up, but it didn't really get big until my freshman year at college.
Right.
I went to did you ever hear of Armies in the Night by Norman Mailer? That book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was there at the Pentagon. It was my freshman year in college. I went down to Washington, and I was staring at these National Guard guys
Yeah.
trying to prevent us from going into that. So I walked away from that. But no.
But there was an awareness when you
Oh,
were still
God, of
here in
course.
Newton. No, but I mean, even in high school.
Oh yeah, of course. It was yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned a lot of great memories from Newton. Was there anything kind of difficult that you remember being here, or was it all fabulous?
It's all fabulous. No, I mean, there's some difficult parts of my life.
Yes.
But I don't think
Yes.
they're necessarily connected to Newton. I think the most difficult part was having to leave Newton.
Yeah.
Because I loved being part of Newton.
Right.
And,
Right.
the political part and going on these tours. Do you know that my name Barbara Tebow? She used to run these architectural walking tours of all the villages. She knew everything about architecture. I learned all about the cupolas and, friezes.
So in every village in Newton?
Well, I think I went on 4 or 5 with her, but I think I showed you those booklets.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Yeah.
So do they still
Yeah.
do it? The
I don't
walking
think
tours?
I don't think so.
That might be something.
That's a
you could
great
do.
thing.
That
Yeah.
would be amazing.
I mean, look at these books. They had the Centennial of Newton. That's a great book. They had another book here. They put out a lot of great books. History of Newton schools. All right. I mean, there's also.
These are really
I
amazing.
inundated myself, and I started writing a book, and then I got my notes somewhere. But
Well, it may be time to start again. How would you describe Newton and the area you grew up to someone who hadn't been here before?
how do you describe it?
How would you describe
Newton
it?
is one of the great communities in America. That I would just, that's all I can say. I've been around. I've toured a lot of the United States. I've been to 44 states, and I've seen a lot of this suburban areas like
Yes.
Westchester County, the Main Line in Philadelphia, Chicago area. San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for 4 years. I lived in Mill Valley, Marin County. So I've seen a lot of these places,
Yes.
and they're all beautiful.
Yes.
They're all beautiful, and they have all the geographical, topographical differences. But I would say Newton is more concerned about education than any of these other places. It's really steeped in education. It's steeped in history. It's steeped in politics. I mean, it's Massachusetts. Where
Yeah.
there's nothing better than Massachusetts if you're a liberal, right? And if you believe in education and real facts and no fake news, I mean, Newton is the best. I mean, it's tremendous. I met so many great. and people that came out of our club, by the way, people who grew up in Newton
Yes,
are
yes.
Leonard Bernstein.
Right.
Jack Lemmon lived across the street from us before we moved in. Betty Davis went to Newton High School. Bobby Morse, and of course, from my class, Deborah Border. She's now she's the CEO of the New York Philharmonic. She went to she
a
was in
lot
that
of
class.
distinguished graduates.
Yes. Peter Goober.
Yes.
Peter Goober
Yeah.
grew up around the street, around the corner from us, and his father was very friendly with my father. They played golf together at Pinebrook Country Club. I knew a lot of people at these country clubs, Camp Vernonia. I had a huge social thing. My father and mother were just social craziness. You know?
Where was Camp Vernonia?
Casco, Maine, outside of Portland. It's
Okay.
no longer there.
Right.
But Peter Goober went there, and he went to Ward School, and who else? Julie Taymor,
Yes.
of course.
Yes. Lion King.
Huh? Yeah. Andy Rosenberg. He I just saw him at the reunion. He's directed for NBC Sports. He directed the Olympics. You know, the World Series. You know, Wimbledon.
Yeah.
He had a great career. There are a lot of
That's
interesting
amazing.
people. We had people in every walk. You know, scientists, lawyers, doctors, and they were all. A lot of the people who came to that reunion. I mean, I could write a book about every one of them. You know.
That's a thought.
It's a thought. Well, maybe no book, but like a little essay on
I
each
think
one.
it's wonderful.
I was thinking of that, you know.
Because 50 years later, to get 200 people who feel that way about
250.
Newton. 250?
Actually, it was
It's pretty amazing.
185 from the class, and we had 65 spouses.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, it was. Well,
That's
you got to
fabulous.
realize there were 800 people in our class.
Right.
We found 320. Another 75 were deceased,
Oh.
and on top of that, we know probably by statistics another 100 had probably died.
Right.
So that leaves about 300 we couldn't find. But we did find 323. Of those, 185 came. So
That's really
pretty nice.
amazing.
it was really nice.
This is amazing. There's so much rich material here. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, highlights that you want to cover of growing up here, being here, special places, memories?
Well, of course, it is the Garden City. It's just so gorgeous everywhere you look. The parks, the trees, the aqueducts. I've taken a lot of tours on lots of different things in Newton. It's fabulous. I try to explore, and I've driven a lot around here a lot. I've driven all over Newton. I know a lot of the streets, and I have a lot of friends in different places. So it's just an overwhelmingly great place to live and explore. And anytime people come into friends of mine come in from out of town, I
Yes.
give them a tour.
Right.
First thing I do is give them a tour in Newton before I take them to Boston.
Boston or Cambridge.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, and the history, is so fast. I love history. There's a history.
Yeah.
I got my teaching degree in history, and I love to go back to the 1600s, 1700s. It's fascinating, and that's a whole other thing that
Sure.
I won't even talk about now. But it's just the city itself is so gorgeous. The Garden City,
And did your
and the
siblings?
politics.
Yeah. Did your siblings end up staying here?
No.
Okay.
My sister got married and immediately moved to New York City.
Uh-huh.
My brother moved to New York City and then moved to Minneapolis. I moved to San Francisco and Washington. I was out of state for 12 years.
Right.
But except for those, I went to NYU, so there's 16 years, and I was in Philadelphia 1 year, 17 years. So of my 68 years, I'd say I've been in the Newton area for 50.
Wow.
Okay,
That's
so
great.
I really try to keep in touch. I don't get the Newton tab doesn't show up in my mailbox, but I go to Walgreens in Newton. I pick up the Newton tab as much as I can.
Okay. So that's how you keep up. And
Yeah.
your friends who are still here.
Yeah,
I'm
I've
sure
got-
there are still
Yeah,
many people.
Yeah, it's do all my basically all my shopping in Newton, or Auburndale. I patronize everybody in Auburndale.
Yeah, yeah.
And go to Chestnut Hill, go to Newtonville, and I mean I just love walking around and
Yeah.
getting out and walking around.
No, it's wonderful, even in the winter, huh?
Yeah, no, even in the winter.
Your enthusiasm is amazing. Is there anything else of the materials you brought, any specific memory you want to make sure we put in there for posterity?
Well, there were great teachers in Newton High School. And
anyone stand
Yes,
out?
John Harris.
Okay, tell us about
John
him.
Harris was my English teacher in 12th grade. And he was brilliant and sardonic and compassionate, and we had this. I sold these like advertising in the back of this,
Yes.
as well as in memory and memorial tributes, and
Right.
different people. Oh, in memory of Robert, in memory of Alan Goldberg, or Madeline McCann, or Eddie McCann, and so forth. So I did in memory of various people, 6 people. Two of them were teachers, Bob Zeeb and John Harris. And John Harris was my guiding light. I'll never forget all the King's Men he taught. He pointed out so many great things in all the King's Men and Hamlet, and I really got excited. And then another woman who's an English teacher, she told me, Mrs. Goldberg, she told me about Northwestern. She'd gone there, so I applied there. I was
Yes.
like the only person from the East Coast who was at this acting school at Northwestern.
That's amazing.
No, Shelley Long. Remember?
Yes, of course.
She was in my class there.
Really?
She went on to fame and
But
fortune.
these were your mentors.
Yeah,
And then
John
you went
Harris
on to
was-
major in English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because of these
And
folks.
then there was Roger Clark in junior high school. He was a great English and social studies teacher. And then in Ward School, Mr. Vito Samarco. He's a legend. He died a number of years ago. He's a legend.
Really? So in
Mr. Samarco.
elementary school.
This is 6th grade.
Impression.
Okay.
Right.
6th grade, and then in 6th grade, it went through 6th grade, and then Bigelow was 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Right.
So this is Vito Samarco. He's a legend. He was just so exciting and fun, and he was great. And they now have a annual memorial dinner for him. Anyway,
Really?
I went back in
Amazing.
1980. I'd left the music business, and I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. So I called Ward School to try to find him, and they said,
Yes.
well, he's the principal in Arlington at Brackett School. So I went over there and said, hi, do you remember me? No, of course not. Bruce Hambro, yeah, I wanted to teach. I'd like to know about teaching. So he made me a teacher's aide. So I was a teacher's aide for him.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I didn't go into
That's
teaching then,
really amazing,
but
though.
for a semester I was a tear's aide there. So that was fun. And then
Amazing connections.
Vito Samarco, he was just. You ask anybody from that, whoever ever in his class, they would say, "Oh, Vito." And junior high school was Roger Clark, and senior high school was John Harris. Mr. Meacham was important. He was the principal of Newton High School.
Right.
Very important person.
Right.
There are a lot of great teachers.
Really amazing.
And politically, Bill Carmen was a great force. He ran for mayor 3 times and never won. He should have. Although he ran against Teddy Mann, he wasn't going to beat Teddy Mann.
I knew Teddy well.
But he
so.
ran against Monty Basbus, and that was it. Basbus is the guy who tore down the greatest crime in Newton history was tearing down the old high school. You know about the old high school? There were 3 buildings. Do you know about that?
No.
You don't know? My God.
We're going to be winding
It
up,
was a
so
gorgeous-
we can end with that.
It was a gorgeous, and everybody who went to our reunion says that was a crime
Really?
beyond compare. And 3 beautiful buildings. They were old, but it was it was like a college campus.
Wow.
And Monty Basbus, they decided to tear the whole thing down. Here's building 2. That's just building
I
2.
got a photo. Look at that.
Building 2.
Beautiful.
That's
Really a campus.
Oh, that was just building 2.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there were 3 buildings. They tore them down, and they built that horrible thing on Lowell Street, which was a monstrosity. And the people who built it, the architects were, the builders were had done nothing but prisons before. And so it looked like a prison. It was disgusting. And so when it came time for those public hearings, I gave my 2 cents worth. So that was my,
Well, you did something. You
I
really
did something to-
influenced the new building.
Yeah, even though it was $200 million, I didn't, it wasn't my overrun.
No, Bruce, that's amazing. This is really fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time to
You're
do
welcome.
this. I
You're
think
welcome.
we need several interviews to
Yeah.
get all your materials. These are really amazing. And I wasn't kidding about teaching a course about Newton history.
I'd love
I
to.
think it would be amazing.
I'd love to, but-
maybe a special program
Yeah,
somewhere, really.
yeah.
Newton Historical Society, maybe they already have that. This
I'd love
has
to
been
do that.
wonderful.
Well, as Dusha Scott and Susan Abley, I used to talk to them a lot, but it was tougher when I moved out of Newton, and now that I have this new business under control, and I think I could now look back to maybe developing a course or something.
I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, I could do that even though I'm not a Newton resident.
Yes.
Okay, good.
You are a Newton resident. You always will be.
Emeritus.
You are really amazing.
Thank you.
For sharing all this and being part of
My
this
pleasure.
oral history project of Newton Talks. Really great sharing with you.
Thank you. Thank you
so much.
You're welcome.
Do we want a picture of some of these fabulous materials?